I wonder how fast warp speed really is. Yeah, it's a bit too fast. Conversely, I wonder how slow this game can get. Let's just stick with normal speed. Why did I choose to cover a Pac Man clone? Okay, don't get me wrong, Pac Man was a great idea. It's a simple concept, and for the average person, it's a fun experience. I, however, suck at Pac Man and everything related to Pac Man. I really have no idea why. I think it has to do with my poor multitasking capabilities, but whatever the case, today's ancient DOS game, CD Man, is actually harder than the original Pac Man, even at slower speed settings. But I didn't intend this to be a long episode anyways, but then again there's some curious things to talk about, and whatever, let's just get to the game stats. Now, there's actually two releases of this game, one in 1989 and the other in 1992, both by Creative Dimensions, which was simply a two-man team based in Sweden. The 1989 release is actually a pre-release featuring 2.5 levels of the 5 levels featured in the completed game. Also, the 1992 release has some considerable differences, which we'll get into soon enough. It's a 1 to 2 player Pac Man clone, featuring 640 by 350 16-color EGA graphics and PC speaker sound. As for its current release date, any average person looking up this game nowadays will figure that it's still commercial. But speaking from experience, it's a bit more ambiguous than that. You see, I first played this game in the early 90s before the 1992 release, but it was at a friend's place and I never did get a copy of the game myself back then. Now fast forward to the late 90s and I decided to try looking up this game again, but every version I could find for download had this strange white poofy character in place of the traditional Pac Man pie slice I was expecting. So whatever, I figured they must have just changed the game due to trademark reasons or something. Now fast forward to the present where I go to look up downloads of this game online and none of them are for the 1992 release because it was a commercial only release. So you can understand my confusion here because a little over a decade ago it was the other way around. The only downloads online were for the registered version, not the pre-release version. And there could be any number of reasons why that was the case, but what it boils down to is that for a period of time, the game was essentially free to download, and that's why I'm listing its current release date as ambiguous. That said, the pre-release version has always been freeware, and as such is available from a bunch of different websites. But the simplest place I can recommend is the Download Central website at www.download-central.ws. Now, for the extremely small number of you who have no idea what Pac Man is, you've obviously been living under a rock. But essentially it boils down to running around a maze collecting little dots while avoiding enemies that roam around. Collect all the dots to move on to the next level and repeat as many times as you can to get the highest score you can muster. It's a really simple concept, so you can understand how there's tons of games that use the exact same mechanics. At first glance, this game seems to have numerous things going for it that the original Pac Man didn't. Well, for starters, this first level here, it's actually a background as opposed to just blank walls. And there's even a gate that you need a key to get through, and there's an underpass that warps you from one part of the map to the other. So far, the game looks like it might actually be something special. Unfortunately, this level really is as good as it gets, as none of the other levels have anything really special about them as far as game mechanics are concerned. And that first level was actually called the Enchanted Forest, while this next level is called the South Pacific and it has a sort of pirate theme going on with sharks instead of spiders. The next level is... yeah, this is what I meant when I said the game had 2.5 levels, so let's move on to the full game. The one last thing I'll make note of is that there's an unlimited lives mode you can activate in the pre-release by pressing F1. Now moving on to the full release, one new thing right off the bat is the character, who has become this white puffy thing known as the snoofer. And as before, you're going around chewing up pellets, but a number of things have been changed in the process. For one thing, when you get eaten by a shark in this version, it doesn't leave behind a pool of blood anymore. And all 5 levels are completed, including Deep Space, Cities of the World, and the Dark Ages, which sort of has a reverse color thing going on. Unfortunately, none of the new levels really have anything special about them. In fact, once you're past the South Pacific, the difficulty drops the further you get into the game, which has more to do with the level design than anything else. It would have been really nice if they introduced some new elements in the later levels, like having to press switches to open areas up or bridges you could go over and under in the Cities of the World stage. That could have been fun. But maybe I'm expecting too much out of this game. One thing that I don't like about this game at all is that the controls and collision detection are not perfect. Every so often, the controls fail to respond, even when you're clearly holding the key down. And it just seems to be random when this happens, so there's not really much you can do about it. Likewise, the collision detection is way too sensitive and based on the total sprite size, which means more often than you might expect, you're gonna die when there clearly wasn't any pixels of your body touching an enemy. Or so few that it's hard to believe it even counts. Heck, in the original Pac Man, enemies had to touch the middle of your body to kill you. Here, they just have to touch a tiny fragment of your body with their sprite space, which for most of the enemies and even the player is larger than their visual appearance. The only other thing to mention really is that the registered version also has a double mode, so instead of 2 players taking turns, they play at the same time, which is kinda neat, but both players look identical, so it's really easy to lose track of which one you're playing as. Hey, yeah, that's CD, man. It's a valiant attempt at a Pac Man clone, and while it looks visually impressive, I prefer the gameplay of the real Pac Man arcade machine, even though I'm generally pretty bad at Pac Man overall. That said, I should probably point out that most DOS clones of Pac Man are utter garbage, so the fact that this one is passable actually made it a good choice for people who wanted Pac Man gameplay on their PCs in the early 90s. Dosbox settings are really simple, but are going to be based on what version of the game you're playing. I find a cycles count of 2000 to be the best choice for the pre-release version, and 9500 to be the best choice for the registered version. As for using Dosbox's widescreen trick for 640 by 350 EGA games, the graphics are already scaled to a minor extent, but not enough really. So unless you're playing this game on a 1610 widescreen monitor, you're either going to have to live with horizontally stretched graphics at 16:9 aspect ratio, or vertically stretched graphics at 4:3 aspect ratio. Anyway, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. As for the hint as to what game's coming up next week, all I gotta really say is this. How many games do you know of where steroids are a power-up? That's what I thought. There were a record number of guesses this week, and I suspect next week's gonna blow that record clean away. So send your guess as soon as possible to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned as we check out one of the manliest games ever conceived.